Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Kathleen Smith, and I'm an associate faculty member at the Bowen Center and in charge of our free professional Thursday night lecture series. And I welcome you to the start of, even though it's almost November, it's strange to say start, the start of another year of those. And it's nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. So I'm going to introduce our speaker. Let me pull up his bio. So Dr. Robert Davis is the founder and executive director of Season with Grace Unboxed, a nonprofit committed to helping develop strong, authentic leaders who create healthy workplace cultures, as well as bringing communities together to develop solutions around public safety and policing. He has over 20 years of experience as a senior pastor, a family life educator, a hospice chaplain, a bereavement coordinator, and a community leader. And Dr. Davis also serves as project coordinator for the Denver Task Force to Imagine Policing and Public Safety, which I believe he's going to talk some about this evening. He's also participated in the postgraduate program at the Bowen Center and the Differentiation at Work program. And maybe some of you heard him present at our spring conference this year. And that's the main reason why I invited him, because I wanted to hear more about what he was working on. And I think it's really fascinating to hear folks who are involved in different professional arenas and how they're using systems thinking in their work on themselves and in their professional work. So Dr. Davis, if you're ready, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And because I'm a co-host, it decided that it wanted to block where I go full screen. First of all, good evening, everyone. And Dr. Smith, thank you so very much for the invitation and this opportunity to share. I'm really excited. And so I want to talk about how Bowen Theory helps facilitators and board chairpersons manage emotionally charged groups. She shared a little bit about my bio. I pastored for 22 years. I always share this whenever I'm speaking to anyone or any event at the Bowen Center. And that is, I'm originally from Washington, D.C. So I'm across the bridge in the Anacostia area, a little community in D.C. called Congress Heights in Southeast. Born at the Southeast Community Hospital and raised in that community as well. So that's what my heart is. So whenever I would come back to the Bowen Center and COVID really threw that all off, or when I would come back home, it was also an opportunity for me to spend time with my mother and to do a little work on self in my family. So I have a lot of connection there. And my last job before I went to college, one of my last jobs was working at the Roy Rogers in Georgetown. So I used to ride the 34 bus all the way up to Georgetown so that I could work there. And I'm pretty sure they've changed all the bus systems. After I left pastoring, while I was pastoring, I also was a hospice chaplain. When I left that, I retired from there and started a nonprofit called Season with Grace Unboxed, where I currently serve as the executive director. At the same time, I began a business called Unbox to Lead. It's a leaders peer support and enrichment community. And was shared before, because I went into a meeting and started running my mouth while the mayor was there. They said, all right, if you're willing to overfunction for the city, then go ahead and take charge of this Denver task force to reimagine policing and public safety. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means in just a second. In this presentation, I hope to discuss how Bowen Theory informs my efforts to bring together conflicting factions in the community, such as community organizers, direct service providers, activists, civil rights leaders, city officials, etc., for the purpose of developing public safety policy recommendations centered around violence prevention and harm reduction, as well as facilitating other community initiatives. And of course, we can't go into everything that I've tried to use in my facilitation and in my community engagement. So what I want to do is I want to narrow it down to 4 of the 8 Bowen Theory concepts that I believe illustrate how theory has assisted me as a facilitator in bringing together individuals with differing philosophies and objectives, and has assisted me in managing self while a part of emotionally charged groups. And so what are those four concepts that I would like for us to think about tonight that, as I said before, has assisted or is assisting me in showing up calmer, less anxious, and managing self in these meetings? The first one is how understanding interlocking triangles helped me remain in meaningful contact with the key members of this unique relationship or emotional system. How understanding societal emotional process or regression in society allowed me to show up in community meetings as a calmer, less anxious presence. How working on differentiation of self and understanding my approximate level of differentiation helped me to develop and live by a clear set of guiding principles. And then how working in my family with a Bowen coach helped me manage relationship difficulties. And this specifically is looking at the nuclear family emotional process. So these are four of the 8 concepts or Bowen theory concepts that I believe were very instrumental in helping me not to be the one cuckoo who flew over the nest. And so I want to talk about how this in particular was applied to dealing with conflictual groups like the Denver Task Force to reimagine policing and public safety. And then I'm going to kind of open it up a little more broader. So if you were at the spring conference in April, you saw this presentation. 2 things. Number one, while I'm going to open up talking about the task force, that's not going to be the central focus of this conversation, because I want to talk about how it is helping to inform other facilitation projects that I am able to participate in and to lead out in, if you will. And then second of all, I want to highlight the areas that I didn't highlight. So the first 2 areas that we talked about, interlocking triangles and whatnot, I talked about those a lot in the spring conference. And I didn't spend as much time talking about the work that I was doing in my individual family. So I'm kind of doing a reverse. I'm going to gloss over those first 2 concepts and focus in on the last 2, which is the reverse of what I did at the spring conference. So I hope that while the material is very similar, that you are, those who were at the spring conference, are able to get something a little different from that. So let me just take a moment and begin to talk about the background and the history of the task force to reimagine policing and public safety. As you well know, May the 25th, 2020, George Floyd was murdered by the police department, the Minneapolis, Minnesota Police Department. Derek Chauvin more directly. And so there was protests that went all over the world. I've never seen anything like this. The very first protest against police brutality in Black neighborhoods or Black communities that I participated in was the Rodney King verdict. And I never forget, we marched on the steps of marched to the White House. That was back when you could actually walk up to the White House. You couldn't get behind that fence. And being encountered with Secret Service and other military personnel to ensure that we didn't storm the White House was very interesting. The yellow star is my daughter. So she's kind of picking up in my step. I think she has a little more self-control and discretion than I do in these matters. But that's my daughter. And this is one of my former members. So that's my daughter, Elise, and that's one of my former members, Ashira. They actually organized a few of the marches and were keynote speakers at a few of the marches. I'm very proud of both of those young ladies and the work that they did to really engage their community. But I think all of us remember the George Floyd protests and how that expanded. So as I told you, I was running my mouth in a meeting. I was the vice president for the Ministerial Alliance here in Denver. And so the mayor came to meet with us, and I told him, I said, we need to reconvene this thing we had called the Use of Force Advisory Committee. But I think we need to look at public safety as a whole, not just use of force policies for the police department. And he said, well, hey, listen, go for it. And so to make a long story short, I had to go for it. So got with several other community organizations. We ended up holding some town hall meetings. We asked community members, who do they believe should be on a task force if we put one together? They recommended over 40 plus community organizations, as well as community leaders. And so on this list that you see here are some of the participating community groups. There are a couple who are not mentioned here, but these are direct service providers, advocacy groups, et cetera, who help to make up the task force. Then we also reached out to government entities. We wanted to make sure that we had the policy makers at the table. We had collaborating partners from around the country, from California to the Vera Institute for Justice in New York, to make sure that we were thinking about public safety through a national lens. We had a research team, facilitators, editors. Really, it ended up becoming the largest community-led task force in the entire nation. And I'm just going to read a quick snippet from our report's executive summary. It just says the Denver Task Force to Reimagine Policing and Public Safety formed in response to the George Floyd protests as a community-led initiative to develop a comprehensive and sustainable community-based approach to policing and public safety. The task force was convened for the purpose of providing to the Denver city government and the Department of Public Safety a series of salutary recommendations and proposals that are informed, actionable, and sustainable. Over 8 months, the task force collaborated with experts, activists, and city officials to develop 112 recommendations in the spirit of reimagining a public safety model that fundamentally prevents, reduces, and heals harm. And I'm not going to go too much further into the work that we've done there and some of the successes that have come out of it. But I'm very pleased and very proud of the work that we were able to accomplish with this task force. Now, what I noticed is that what we observed in the task force, and this really goes to the heart of Bowen Theory, and that is whenever you are observing a relationship system, and even though churches and workplaces and community gatherings or community initiatives are different than biological or nuclear families, you see some of those same relationship processes that are playing themselves out inside of all of these spaces where human beings are gathered together and are working through relationship challenges and dealing with anxiety, et cetera. So I want to transition at this point from the work that we did with the task force to just talk about how Bowen Theory has, as a whole, helped to inform the work that I'm attempting to do as a facilitator, chairing boards, and things of that nature. So again, the first aspect of theory that was very beneficial is understanding triangles. One of the things that was very beneficial was recognizing how triangles develop. Well, first of all, recognizing that triangles are neither good, they are neither evil, they just are. And so understanding that, and then being able to recognize triangles within the relationship system. And so one of the things that I attempted to do in the work that I was doing, which is very much a key part of Bowen, is to be very clear about who I'm in relationship with so that I can begin to identify the role that I'm playing in certain of these triangle relationship dynamics. And I don't want to insult anyone, but I'm going to assume that we're at different levels in our exposure to Bowen Theory. So recognizing that when I am in relationship as a chairperson or as a facilitator, that I am basically in a triangle with every third person at the table. So it's me, the one person, and then whoever that third person is, we have just formed a triangle, whether it is intentional or whether it is inadvertent. And being intentional about thinking about how that looks and how I'm managing myself in that triangle. So for me, actually drawing out these type of triangles, and the names here are all fictitious, except mine, but being able to say, okay, I'm in relationship with community members as well as the city government, and then understanding how that looks. So noticing when I am in the inside position with someone else in the triangle, and when I have allowed the other person in the triangle to be on the outside position. As we well know, no one likes to be on the outside position. And most people, if not everyone, enjoys being on the inside position. And I'll talk about my level of maturity in just a moment, but recognizing how my level of maturity contributes to these triangles was very helpful as well. That's why I want to talk about that later on. But mapping out these triangles and really identifying how they were showing up, and more importantly, what am I doing to foster or to encourage any type of counterproductive behaviors in these triangles. And this right here is probably one of the most difficult things, because I come from an orientation where even though I don't have a clinical degree and I have no clinical licensing, I was my culture and society trained me to diagnose everybody. So within a few seconds, I can diagnose whether a person is narcissistic, whether they're a troublemaker, whether they are a drama queen, whatever term you want to label on somebody. And then I can justify why it is that this person is, or why I should not interact with this person in a healthy, constructive way, and why I should put them in the outside position of the triangle. But understanding that limitation and putting this triangle, something about the visualness of the triangle that's very powerful. And so what I attempted to do was to be intentional on how I can remain one-to-one contact. Now, remember, this was the intention. This was not always the success. So I don't want to confuse what I was hoping to do with what I actually did. But this was my intention, was to how do I remain? Because by doing this helps me to identify, how do I remain? Okay, I have a relationship with the homeless service provider, and I have a relationship with the addiction service provider. How do I maintain one-to-one relationship with them individually? But then also when I look at the triangle, and by physically drawing this out, it helps me to think about, how am I managing when I'm in relationship with both of them at the same time? And then thinking about, how do I get outside of that triangle so that, again, I'm not forcing anyone to the outside position. How do I not take on responsibility for Sandra and Mary's relationship? That's a lot of facilitators. I'm the king of it. Love to take on the responsibility of managing their relationship. And so, just by drawing out this triangle, it was very, very beneficial to me. So let me move forward to talk about understanding regression in society. Another aspect of Bowen theory that I thought was very beneficial was, especially, and now I'm going to go back to the task force for a moment, but was really understanding regression in society, or emotional process in society, or societal emotional process, was very beneficial, because a lot of what we're seeing in the workplace, a lot of what we're seeing in society, in other gatherings, is the outplay of the societal emotional process. And I think that out of all of the aspects of Bowen theory that we focus on, I think that this is the one, and I'm saying this having spent 3 years in the postgraduate program. I'm in my second year of the differentiation at work program. And this is the one that is the least discussed. And I think that this is one of the areas that has such a profound impact, especially considering, and this is why I think Bowen was so far ahead of his time, because Bowen, espoused this before the advent of social media. But I think with social media and the way that now we're able to communicate 24/7, and in real time and in various ways, I think that has cranked up the level of anxiety that we see in society. So what we saw primarily in families, we are now saying, this is just me pontificating, so bear with me. But I think what we used to only see, or what we primarily saw at work in families, we're seeing in whole swaths of society, because society, as we've said, the global community has become so much smaller, and people are interacting so much more, whether it's leaving comments and chats, posting videos, doing blogs. Everybody has a blog nowadays, it seems like. Everybody has a YouTube channel, is putting up videos. It's just so much interaction. And so understanding how this looks, or at least having an elementary understanding, helped me to kind of pause and take a deep breath and say, okay, this is kind of what's going on. So let me pause and take a deep breath and ask a question. And I'm gonna try to listen to about 4 or 5, if some of you are willing to share. And that is, how does the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter protest help us to understand societal emotional process or regression in society? I'm curious. I have my thinking and I'm going to share it, but I'm curious to what your thinking is as well. How do you think the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter protests, how do you think that helps us to understand societal emotional process? So how does that help you? Let me personalize it. How does that help you? Or how did that phenomenon help you to understand societal emotional process? And I think they want us to use the raised hand feature.
Yeah, you raise your hand, and I'll call on you. And just for the sake of time, let's keep our thought. But I mean, share your thinking, but let's make space for others to share as well. Is my thought. Dr. Davis, can I go? Can I get the moderator privilege? One thing I think about with regression is like self and pseudo self. So like the defining one's own thinking versus the pressure to keep up and to adopt others' thinking quickly, how there is a purpose for that. There is a benefit to acting quickly with a lot of societal challenges, but that deeper challenge of defining one's own thinking, not just jumping to a quick fix, staying plugged into a challenge in the long haul and what that takes, I think is very difficult with the climate right now. So I'll stop talking and let somebody else add to the conversation.
I see Mary Overton physically raising her hand. Miss Mary, you're on mute, ma'am.
Mary, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes. I think my first reaction is the whole concept of how important identity is to Bowen. And the African-American identity, I think it symbolizes how much the African-American has regarded their own identity over the last few decades.
You want to elaborate more, or?
No, I'm fine there.
All right, thank you very much for sharing. I appreciate that. Anyone else want to chime in? Okay, I'm going to move on and share with you where my thinking is on this. And somehow, some way, I figured out how to mess it up. So when you stop screen sharing, you have to go back and start all over again. So here we go. So let me share with you what my thinking is on this subject. And I think 2 things. Number one, the George Floyd protests and the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter protest showed us that, I believe, showed us that there's an over-reliance on law enforcement to solve our various social issues. I think that we're seeing we saw and we still are seeing a very unique dynamic. And these photos are from Denver, by the way. But we're seeing a very unique dynamic where rather than communities working through some of the problems, we then triangle in law enforcement or government officials, et cetera. So whereas in the good old days, whenever those were, where people would be more inclined to interact or to solve problems, whenever you turn on any media, you see someone calling the police on someone over something very insignificant, setting up a Kool-Aid stand, I mean a lemonade stand or whatever it may be. And I think that we've gotten to a place where we rely on others, and I see that as a form of triangling. I think there's also a form of underfunctioning. And so we can kind of see how underfunctioning is really playing out in society. Whereas again, whenever there is a problem, the first reaction, if you think about it, if the store owner had said to Mr. Floyd, "Excuse me, sir, there's something funny about this money. I'm not sure. Are you sure this is legit?" Or, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't accept this. This doesn't look like it's a real $20 bill." That very well could have saved a man's life. But rather than do that, we kind of have this knee-jerk thing where I'm not going to function for myself. Let me just call 911 and let them handle it. Another thing that I think that we see is the collective anxiety of society. As Bowen talked about, focusing on vulnerable groups. I had a kind of an epiphany today where I was thinking about the ads from the early 80s. And there was this, this huge thing about what was it called? It was called affirmative action. And the whole thing was the Blacks have come along to take your jobs. And we're not even thinking about it, but that same language is being used today, but it's not the Blacks who's coming to take your jobs. It's the immigrant, more specifically, the Latino immigrant that's coming along to take your job, and they're sneaking in here. Somehow it's the other. And so I believe that what we're seeing in our society, and I know this has been since America was started, but with the access of media, we're seeing a rise in it, which is that collective anxiety where we begin to focus on the other. And I see this as part of the projection or emotional projection process. So these are two ways that I look at the Black Lives Matter. I look at the George Floyd protest, and I'm seeing, or what I'm seeing from Bowen Theory. And I see Rob Shader has his hand raised. Yes, Rob. You'll have to unmute yourself, sir.
Can you see me at all?
I cannot see you, but I can see you.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
Let me see if I can figure this out. Oh, yeah, there you go. Okay, I'll just say it. I don't want to hold things up. You talked about triangling, and I know in my own work in community organizing and community development, one of the things that I observed and was part of was, triangles formed almost automatically, of course, and
Yes.
they continue to form and then build on each other, and from an individual committee to a community to the media, and that triangling actually, I don't know how I would describe it, almost like a transformer, increasing almost exponentially the anxiety as the triangles build one after another.
Man, and I'm glad you said it. So you kind of see a circulation and escalation of anxiety throughout our society. And I think that's what we saw with the George Floyd protest, because one of the things we have to remember that was going on was everyone was inside due to the pandemic. And so you had this heightened level of anxiety or just around people dying. I mean, we lost a lot of people as a result of COVID. And then you had this to take place, and people had nowhere to go, kind of nothing to do. And you just saw it all kind of explode. And one of the things that helped me, because the whole thing is about how this has helped me. One of the things is thinking about as a facilitator, especially of community discussions, but regardless of community, whether it's, you're pastoring a church board or you're pastoring, or you're the chair of a nonprofit or whatever it may be, I think it's wise for us to think about what's going on in society, and especially kind of to focus it on the particular area that we're looking at. So if it is a church board that you are chairing, what is going on in society that is directly impacting the way people are thinking and how things are playing out on the local board? What's going on in society? If you're chairing a nonprofit that provides services to the unhoused, we know that homelessness rates are rising across the nation. What impact is that having? How is society responding to and organizing itself around these various issues? I think that helps us to show up with a better understanding of what's going on in the system, as well as the part that we are playing. The next thing that I want to talk about is, and that I thought was very beneficial to me, is understanding my approximate level of differentiation. And I used to say that I function at around 100 for at least 6 to 8 hours every day. And that's while I'm sleeping. Until about 3 nights ago, I had a dream where this guy was flirting with my wife. And I went up there to confront him in my dream, and it ended up devolving into a fist fight. And I was like, I can't even be differentiated in my dreams. It was somewhat discouraging. I was like, hey, at least I thought I could be different. I could be at a higher level of differentiation in my dreams, and I realized I can't even do it in my dreams. But understanding my approximate level of differentiation helped me and helps me to be able to develop strategies. And I'll tell you, when you see where I rank myself on the scale, I think it'll become a little clearer. So what I'm going to do real quickly is I'm just going to go through the things I'm about to share with you. Come from these 2 books here, Family Therapy and Clinical Practice, as well as Family Evaluation. In Family Therapy and Clinical Practice, Dr. Bowen lays out the 4 quarters, as he refers to them as, and the lowest quarter, which is 0 to 25. He identifies it as, and I'll let you read it. So let me, as I'm gonna leave these up. I'm gonna talk about something. I'm gonna talk about it, but I'll let you read this on your own, and I'll be talking about things. And I'm gonna go from slide to slide so you can kind of see. One of the things, again, is when you recognize kind of where you are on this scale, it helps you to be more realistic about what your emotional limitations may be. So when you kind of when you can identify where you land, it helps you to be able to say, okay, this is my strength, but this is also an area of growth for me. And this is what I have the capacity to do, and this is what I'm going to need to be intentional on and to develop strategies for. And that's one of the things, of course, working with a Bowen coach and others is so important, is actually developing strategies so that you can be more intentional about how you're showing up. And so recognizing where you are on this scale, it really does help you to map out those courses, map out that a course for your life and a plan on how you're going to interact with people who who you typically find very difficult, or relationships that you are fused with and that you're very emotionally reactive towards. All of these different things, when I know where I kind of fall on this level, it helps me an awful lot in that regard. And so I have, looking at how, and there's been others who have addressed it, but looking at what Bowen says in the book, Clinical Therapy and Practice, I've placed myself somewhere between 27 and 35. Now, as we know, and I like how Dr. Roberta Gilbert says it in her 2006 book, the scale theoretically ranks people on a spectrum between 0, the lowest possible level of differentiation, and 100, the highest potential level. Both of these points are merely hypothetical. No one is that well off or that badly off. People actually live at points in between these two. Most of the population scatters below 30. And I think that's very well for me. And so what I understand is that on my best day, and this is one of the things that I'm wrestling with, I'll share with you in a second, but on my best day, I'm going to probably show up at around a 35. What is a 35? What does that look like? And this is me on top of the world here in Colorado. This is Mount Elbert. It's the tallest mountain in the Rockies, 14,400 feet, somewhere around there. And so my son and I climbed that last year. And so I put that up there because even when I'm on top of the world, it's, you know, I still recognize that that's still not at the highest level. And this is not, you know, me self-deprecating, and this is not me being critical of self. It's being honest so that when I walk into a meeting and again, looking at those triangles and saying, hold on a second, I recognize that I become very reactive when, you know, John Doe makes these type of statements, or when John Doe does X, Y, and Z. Recognizing that, you know, on my best day, I'm going to show up at around a 35 helps me to then either get with my coach to talk things through, to work out a strategy, B, to actually do some game planning on my own, to use some mindfulness exercises, to dig a little deeper into theory or into the spiritual disciplines that I believe in, so that, and then to, you know, chart out a plan, to draw up a plan. Okay, how am I going to show up in this meeting with John Doe so that I don't become as reactive, or at least so that I don't appear as reactive, you know, so that I can at least, you know, show up as a calmer, less anxious leader in this particular situation. And this is something that I really found very beneficial, even though, you know, different people will rank the scale differently. Having an idea of what are your areas of strength, what are your areas of weakness, or your areas of challenge is very beneficial when you're in these various, when you're leading these conversations, and just in life in general. So that's one of the reasons why I found this particular aspect of theory very beneficial. The last part that I want to talk about before we open the floor to everyone is working through the nuclear family emotional process. So like I told you, the two that I didn't talk about as deep last time was understanding my approximate level of differentiation, and then working through the nuclear family emotional process. And so, as you see here on the screen, this is my mother and my father and myself. This is me at my wedding 20 years ago as of May. My mother and father at this time were not married. They married 2 years ago. They remarried 2 years ago when my father became very sick and is now bedbound. And my mother has moved to Alabama to care for him. And then as way leads on to way, they ended up getting remarried. It has been a remarkable experience, as I've shared with my coach and others. I had never seen my mother and father kiss, and they did not have the capacity to maintain a relationship with each other, a relationship with my brother and I. My father didn't have the capacity to maintain a relationship with my mother's other two children that she had before they met, as well as maintain a relationship with his parents and her parents. It was just a little too much for him to manage. And so he chose to manage it through distance and cutoff. And so my father and I were cut off from each other for nearly 30 years of my life. My mother has a very strong personality. And so she comes on very strong, and then there will be these periods of distance that will happen between she and I. And so by being a part of the postgraduate program and by receiving coaching through Dr. Kenton Durstein, that's my coach, he's been my coach for the last several years, we really began to, you know, map out my family diagram, and then to really think about how that looks. And so I began to work on creating and consistently updating my family diagram. Family research has been very rich. It was in this process that I learned the name Joseph Davis. Joseph Davis is my grandfather's grandfather. He was the last slave in our family and the first freedman. And just kind of learning what I could learn about his experiences and his journey has just been so refreshing for me and so beneficial. I've been working on a conflictual and distant relationship with my mother, noticing and realizing that I am very reactive to my mother in many ways. One, through overfunctioning. Another one is through becoming so frustrated that I use distance in order to manage it. And so working through that with her, through this process, I've been working on the nearly 30 years of cutoff from my father, working on managing self and relationship with mother and father, who, as I shared before, remarried 2 years ago after being divorced for over 40 years. And as I said, I have no memory of them actually ever being married. And then working on relationship with my sister, who was not raised in the home with me. And that's a very unique relationship. Working on managing the triangle between my mother and my brother, who also is diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So these things has helped me because as so many people say, if you can if you can work out, I think it was Dr. Kathleen Smith who refers to working in family as high elevation training. I hope that I'm quoting her somewhat correctly, since she's here and can correct me if I'm wrong. But it's akin to high elevation training. And if you can really work on becoming more of a self in, highly reactive and highly emotional relationships that are family relationships, then that spills over and translates and will translate into every other relationship. Now, I know I butchered, she said it much more eloquently than that, but I think you get the point. And that is, this has helped me a lot because I was intentional about working on how to show up in highly reactive relationships. And of course, I have not been in a relationship more reactive than the relationship that I have with my mother and the relationship that I've had with my father, because not only did he cut off from me, I cut off from him, because at a point I was at an age level where I could have sought and fostered a relationship with him. And my argument, of course, was, well, I'm the child. Why should I pursue the adult? Even though I'm an adult now, I'm still the child, in this relationship. So why should I pursue him? And I'm not asking my children to pursue me. I'm a good father, and blah, 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 blah. The justifications that we give ourselves for not being more intentional in relationships. But working on those things, recognizing them, and again, developing plans and strategies for how when I come back to DC, or used to come back to DC for the postgraduate program, how was I going to stay at my mother's home? Because for many times when I would come back to DC, I would stay at my friend's house rather than stay at my mother's house, because I didn't want to have to bother with putting up with her. But then I said, you know what, I am going to stay at my mother's house, as challenging, or her apartment rather, as challenging and difficult as this is going to be for me. I need to do this so that I can manage myself in all relationships or in other relationships. And so these are some of the things that were very intentional and some of the things that I recommend. So you'll notice that on this slide here, I talk about working on, and then I talk about on this slide here, working through. So I'm talking about what I mean by working through. Working through the togetherness forces, working through the change back forces, working through well-established relationship patterns, and working through multi-generational emotional processes. So while I'm working on my family relationships, I have to also at the same time, and this was very beneficial exercise, if you will, I also had to work through these various aspects of the relationships. So having to work through the togetherness forces. I remember the first time that I, shared with my mother that I would no longer serve as a go-between for her and my brother, and that they would need to, that they were both adults and would need to have one-to-one conversations. I remember that whole change back coming in very strong. And I remember those feelings when my mother and brother would have conversations where I was obviously being discussed and I was not a part of the conversation, and that that feeling of the outsider. And before, I didn't know how to name it. Before studying theory, I didn't know how to name it. But I knew that I was having these negative feelings, which for me was, hey, you know what? That's just them, and I'm not going to be bothered with this mess. My name is Wes, and I ain't in this mess. But the problem is I am in the mess. I'm just as much a part of it as they are. So working through the togetherness forces, working through the change back forces, working through well-established relationship patterns. I'm at the age now where I'm getting closer and closer to that point where they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I used to say that about people that's pushing 50, and now I'm pushing 50. So your words come back to haunt you. But the truth of the matter is, there are these well-established relationship patterns that are just so natural and common, just as natural as walking or as breathing. And then working through multi-generational emotional processes. My family is the masters of family secrets. We that's our, and we both can hide secrets, or trying to get certain family facts is sometimes challenging, especially around slavery, because the older people in my family who knew my great-great-grandfather do not like to talk about slavery. It's a very embarrassing thing for our family. And so to try to gather certain information, they will literally talk all around it. So working through the multi-generational emotional processes, as I said, the family secrets, the way that women are viewed in our family, and all these other dynamics has been a challenge, but a challenge that is beneficial when I'm entering into community conversations and community relations. Let me end off now by just sharing 7 things that I would encourage everyone to utilize. I think that these Bowen principles will help you to facilitate community conversations, to chair boards, or whatever it is, and to manage the anxiety in self. Number 1 is to work with a coach / study systems theory. It only works if you work it, and you can't use theory. I think Dr. Bowen says you can't use theory unless you know theory. So I encourage everyone to study systems theory. And I encourage them, of course, to study it in consultation with a coach. Number 2, observe what is taking place in the system and the part that I'm playing. Let me back up for a second and talk about working with a coach, because one of the things I appreciated about the postgraduate program is that I have formed what I believe are lifelong friendships with other people who are studying theory and are attempting to apply this theory to their lives. And so now we actually meet as a group. I believe it's once every other month, and we just literally sit down and talk about what we're working on in our family, in our workplace. It's just a conversation where we talk about theory, listen to each other, share, ask questions, and help each other to think through certain issues. It's tremendous. So working with a coach, others who are studying theory, and of course the study systems theory. Number 2, observe what is taking place in the system. And the part that I'm playing. Again, that triangle diagram is wonderful. Remain in contact with the key members of the system. Again, that triangle diagram, mapping out everyone on the list and kind of going through, asking a series of questions. How well am I doing staying in contact with them? How well am I doing with avoiding reactivity towards this person? So if I was to put everybody's name, and I put John Doe, Sally Sue, John Doe, how well am I doing in staying in contact with him? How well have I been in with my emotional reactivity towards him? How have I been, with over or under functioning in relationship with him? Kind of charting out some of these questions helps me to look and become realistic and to say, hey, these are some of the things that I need to do to improve my functioning. Develop strategies to work in the nuclear family is another thing that I would strongly encourage everyone who is going to be a board chairperson to do. Develop strategies to manage self in the triangles, as we talked about just a moment ago. Observe and note societal emotional process or regression in society. Again, I think this is one of the most underappreciated, and this is again just from my exposure, so it's very limited, but from my exposure and observations, this is one of the most underappreciated aspects of Bowen theory. And then, of course, work on differentiation of self with a basic understanding of my approximate level of differentiation. I think the more we can say, okay, this looks about where I'm falling. And a good Bowen coach will not tell you where you fall, but will help you to be more realistic on where you are falling in that spectrum or along that line. Okay, that's just about everything that I know about everything. If you're interested in learning anything about the task force, there's the website. If you're interested in learning anything about Unbox to Lead, here are the websites and whatnot. And I'm going to go ahead and open up for questions. I'm gonna leave this slide up for about 2 minutes, and then I'm going to close out the screen share and just open up for conversation. So
just a reminder of folks to use the raised hand function. And let me get the gallery instead. Kathleen Colley.
Thank you
You're
so
up.
much. Can you hear me?
yes,
Thank you so much. This was such an interesting presentation. I think so many times people get enamored with the theory, with ideas, and they'll say, well, it's important to work on one's own family if you're going to be in community organization or know your reactivity. This was such a nice intersection of what does that really mean? And I'm really big on that. I think that people need more and more and more and more of this. What does it mean to work on your family? And many are simplistic about that. Well, you just go home and get to know people. But this really delineated, number one, being realistic about our level of differentiation of self so that we don't pretend to be something that we're not when we enter these meetings that can be highly charged in this. And even clinical work can be highly charged now with all of the polarizations that are going on. I noticed it tonight with the terrible shootings up in Maine, and the senator was on, and people were going after her politically and where she stood on things. And I thought, oh my gosh, how hard is it to hold your own? And you took that, put it up into the family and said, people can hold their own. Dr. Bowen believed really with your mother toward the top of the list, not your mother, but all of our mothers. We can really do it elsewhere. And I think this was such a nice combination of the two. So my question would be this, as you dug deep and did your own effort on working on self in your extended family and your nuclear family, what difference did that make when you were actually in the room at these meetings, people coming at you in Denver, what have you? How would you describe why it mattered? Why people say, why should I bother doing this effort in my own family? What would you say to them?
One of the things, and I'm a novice at theory. I really am. That's why I did a whole lot of cut and pasting for this presentation, because when it comes to a knowledge of theory, I'm quite the novice. But one of the things that it did for me, and I gave that caveat so that I don't get jumped on, but one of the things that it did for me is when I walk into meetings now, I see the characters of my family. I have not entered into a community meeting where I don't see my brother or my cousin or my mom or my dad or myself or others. And so I don't know what it is. I'm talking about so far as the way that they relate to me, the way they relate to other people, their tone of voice, the way, the way that they interact. I'm looking at, and it's not 100%, of course, that, but it's significant enough that working in family, I can kind of bounce around a little bit and say, okay, I don't literally say this, so I guess actually I do sometimes, that's my brother right there. my brother who will be agreeing with you and then just for no reason whatsoever will throw in something to stir up a conflict. Well, that's okay. I've been working with my brother. We have a relationship. This is some of the tools that I use to manage myself in that relationship. So I got this. I can do this. So it has given me a certain level of confidence when I actually can become calm enough to think about it. So I hope that I'm not giving the impression that every single time it comes up, I'm at such a calm level that I can actually think to do that. But when I can think about it, it is very beneficial. When I can't think about it, God have mercy.
God have mercy on us all.
All right. Is it Marcel?
Yes, thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Davis. I can understand our own personal work with our own parents, especially, and siblings. This may be a little bit, I don't know. The one thing that I'm finding, and it seeps into even in the therapy room, is the media influence, the idea of this overreaction to everything. And what do you think about that stuff? Any thoughts? It's like everybody seems to be, not everybody, but people seems to be triangulated with this media that seems to be totally reactive to everything. Not considering the current situation, and I'm talking in general.
So I'm gonna use my own personal example as an African American here, as an African American. There's a few things that I believe. I believe that history teaches that descendants of slaves in America, our ancestors were brought here as prisoners of war. They were brought here as slaves. And then I believe that in order to maintain that, we have developed certain systems which have now translated into what we refer to as municipal police departments. I also have a strong held belief that one of the things that is going to help this nation to heal is that we have to address the issue of reparations. One of the things that I noticed within myself, and I'm not asking anyone else to agree with this, but one of the things that I've noticed within myself, talking about media, is that I find myself gravitating towards those media outlets, especially now that everyone has a blog and stuff, that reinforce that particular point of view. So there is a genre of news media that is referred to as the new Black media. And so those are individuals that are more about Black liberation and empowerment. And so I find myself leaning towards them, and I have to be very intentional to say, no, I need to constantly reevaluate my thinking on these issues, to constantly reevaluate my thinking about the role of policing in Black communities, to reevaluate my thinking, which I could be accurate, but I still need to reevaluate my thinking in terms of reparations and what that looks like, et cetera. Reevaluate my political views and whatnot. And so I think that, like myself, many people gravitate towards those voices that reinforce what they already believe. And actually, if you look at the slide where Bowen talked about that, I believe it's kind of in that lower level. And I had to cut out so many other characteristics, but in the lower level of differentiating, he talks about how we kind of look toward authority figures we don't have our own thinking. So the pseudo self looks toward authority, scholars, experts, and people who think like us to reinforce what we already believe. And that's a lot of the pseudo self showing up. So I think that that's what we're seeing a lot of, is a lot of people gravitating toward medias that reinforce the pseudo self.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Kathy Minardi.
Much for this presentation. I just have a a small story to share that connects deeply with what you've shared, Robert. My family system is very intensely complicated with African American, white, and indigenous peoples in my ancestry. And I, for 20 years, ran a school in Washington, D.C., private school, and was a part of a community of a small group of heads who worked together with actually Margaret Treadwell, who was our family systems therapist. And we met with her once a month. I had been disconnected from my brother, who went to kindergarten when I went to college. So we lit, and he changed religions, and there was a lot of reasons why we were disconnected. And Peggy would put our family system up on a whiteboard as we started the school year and ask what was going on that was driving us crazy. And there was one teacher in the school who despised me. She hated me and was making me miserable. And Peggy said, well, who in your family system here on the whiteboard are you disconnected with? And I named my brother, and she suggested I get in contact with him and start developing a relationship. And I did. And like a miracle, this teacher who hated me began to diminish her negative reactions, and it started to heal. And that we were together, this whole group, for 20 years. And I felt like it was the keys to the kingdom. It was such a help to balance the family system with my system in the school as a leader. It just was amazing. So I thank you all in Bowen Center for what you contributed, and also for what you've shared tonight. It's just amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
Is it Joe Berger or Berger? Sorry if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong.
Berger.
Okay.
Thank you for this presentation. It was just really interesting. I'm wondering if you think it's possible to accurately observe a societal emotional process. I've just been thinking lately about how challenging that is. And if you think there are barriers that make it harder to see things more accurately. I'm kind of thinking about, like, what's real is what I observe, you know, on the news and sort of articles written by someone on one side of an issue and someone on another side. Is that the process, or is the process like if I go out and talk to actual people and hear what they think about an issue? So I'm curious if that makes any sense, or if you have thoughts about that.
I don't have an answer on how to distinguish between facts and fiction. I have a very low regard for the corporate media. I'm just going to be honest with you. And it's scary, because I think that we live in such dangerous times that we have to have a media that can be trusted and is not overtly biased one way or the other. And I see most of our media, mainstream media, shilling for one political party or the other. And it frightens me, because even things like a pandemic become political, when if there's anything that we should have rational conversations about vaccines and masks and things, it has to be during the midst of a pandemic, and it can't be politicized. But we're not there. As it relates to, I think that you're correct. This is my thinking, of course, that there are so many moving parts when we talk about the societal emotional process. But I do believe that an understanding of Bowen helps us to understand the big picture, also helps us to understand the part that we're playing in the in the societal emotional process. So the big picture, again, is the triangles. I think that we can see clear triangles between, let's just use political parties. So you have the voter, the Democrat, the Republican, and you can kind of see how that whole thing kind of plays out when you look at, okay, what's going on in this triangle, or when you look at, pro-life, pro-choice, and the courts, how is this whole triangle playing out, or the courts and the media and the interlocking triangles. I think if you can understand theory, while you may not be able to understand the full complexity, it is quite complex. I think that you can at least have a working knowledge that can be beneficial to your own maturity, but also beneficial in your interactions with those who have differing views and people who are highly anxious themselves, to lower the level of anxiety. So I do think that to some degree or another, that is possible. And I hope that I didn't make that as clear as mud. I hope I...
No, thanks.
All right, Jennifer Long.
I'll just say one more in the course of thank you for this evening's presentation. I am in particular curious about the type of training. I don't know anything about high altitude training, so I don't know if that's it. What I was thinking, what little I know about it, suggests to me that the work is to be able to tolerate being present at those higher altitudes. And I wondered that as you did this work, it sounded to me like you were talking about doing work side by side, both work in your community organizing and work in your family. And I wondered, as you did that, how did that training affect either side? Was that something that went hand in hand? Was there one of those spaces that you felt helped you move up in altitude more quickly? I was just curious about that.
For me, I experienced a greater level of growth, whatever that means, by working with the family. I think that part of Bowen theory is perhaps the most spot on of all aspects of theory. And that is that as one works in family, it improves their functioning in all other relationships. And so that for me was the high altitude training for me. That was what helped me the most. Now, of course, there is, this dual complementary aspect of the work. So working in community and with highly charged community meetings also helped me to be a little calmer in dealing with family, and dealing with family helped me to be a little calmer. And so it was a both and, but I believe that I would put more weight. And if someone said you can only work on one and then you have to show up in the other, do you want to work in community and then have to show up at home? Or would you prefer to work in family and then have to show up in community? I would rather work in family. I think it's more beneficial to work in family and to show up in community with what I've been working with in family than vice versa, if that makes any sense.
Thank you.
All right, Randy Frost.
Yes, thanks for this presentation. I've been thinking a lot about baselines of functioning and how one evaluates changes in baseline functioning. And I hear you describe your effort in your own family. And I'm just wondering first how you might describe your baseline of functioning and the baseline of functioning of your family when you began to learn about Bowen theory and work on yourself in relation to the family. How did that baseline shift, if you think it has, not only for you, but for the unit? And then I was thinking about your efforts in Denver with the assembled community groups that were part of your task force. And if you were to try to take a baseline of the functioning in the community at the time you got working with that group, has that changed? Has there been a shift in the baseline of functioning in the group? Not only you and your efforts, but the shift in the relationships of people and groups that are ordinarily at odds with each other.
Just had a conversation about a month ago with one of our leading community activists here, and just asked her how were two of her very close friends doing. And she replied, "We're not speaking any longer." And it really kind of was a punch in the chest to me, because I had hoped that by maintaining what I was hoping were meaningful one-to-one contacts with each person on the task force, each person in that system, that it would help others, that it would automatically translate into helping others to do it. And what I noticed when the task force first formed, it wasn't just that it was government versus citizens, or law enforcement versus community, or whatever it may be. It was even within various service providers. There's a lot of tension, a lot of striving for resources. There, among activists and community organizers, there's a lot of striving. And so I'll be honest with you, if there's any one area, and I wish you hadn't brought this up, because this was supposed to be my triumphant ride through the city. And now I have to be honest about my triumphant failures. And that is, I have not been successful at helping others to maintain meaningful relationships, and not to become reactive towards one another. And I'll be honest with you, it is somewhat discouraging. I know, and this one of the good things about knowing my level is that I struggle with over functioning. And so I take on an awful lot. My functional role in the family was the over functioner, was the one who was to be successful, et cetera, and that whatever success means for our family, or meant for our family. And I noticed that I carry that with me. So I don't know why I thought that magically it didn't work when I was a pastor. My spirituality didn't translate to the spirituality of my members, and it's sure not working in my community thing, but it's something that I wrestle with. So to answer your question, I didn't see that translation. I think you had more in there than I just answered. Did I answer it, or was this a couple other pieces that you were looking at as well?
Yeah, I guess it partly depends what you look at as a baseline of function,
okay.
And how that did or didn't modify over a certain period of time of you trying to manage you in a more differentiated way. And that would be, you have a baseline in the community, you have a baseline in your functioning. And of course, with differentiation, you're just working on you. But if you're somewhat successful, at least in the family, one can anticipate that it's going to rub off on others. And it's just a matter of saying, what are those markers of where you start and where the unit and you are now?
I never did a baseline for the community. Maybe that's a project that I need to engage in as I move forward, to try to figure out to the best of my abilities as someone who's not a clinician, to kind of do a baseline. I have done it for myself, which is reinforced what Bowen seems to suggest, which is we don't rise a whole lot above where we were on our level of on the differentiation scale. But what has happened is, and this is why I said we don't rise much, what has happened is those things that were naturally in me, which was, self-actuation, wanting to, pursue greater education to be more successful in my career and personal life, has come into Bowen. What I understand of people who are higher level, and I would be really interested in hearing your thinking around this, as well as Dr. Smith's and others. My understanding is that those who are higher on the scale, it's more natural for them. So the calmness, the way they show up, it's something that they're not having to necessarily work as hard on. Just like some people are just born naturally fast. I think Usain Bolt is naturally fast. And when I watched the documentary about his training regimen, he doesn't really train that hard compared to some of the other athletes. He's the fastest man in the world, still on record. It's just he's just naturally fast. And so I think about people on a higher level, it's something that's more natural to them. For me, if I'm not intentional in thinking about it, I go into meetings, I show up in relationships on the lower end, like around 25, 26, 27. And you see all of those characteristics of reactivity and whatnot. So to show up at a higher level, I have to be very thoughtful and intentional to do it. It's just not as natural for me as it is for some others.
Yep, I hear that.
Like I said, I'm very interested in seeing if that is in line with theory, or am I misunderstanding something? I'm always open to learning more. So like I said, Dr. Smith, Mr. Frost, y'all are the residential experts on theory, not me.
What I hear you saying is that you would characterize your functioning on a range between 25 and what was it, or 27 and 35, something like that.
Yes, sir.
And then when you're on your game, and you're focused and working on you going into challenging situations, you can function more to the upper part of that range.
Yes.
And attention lapses, you're more vulnerable to functioning at the lower end of that range. And I guess from a theory point of view, to the extent you can develop a more solid self, and really incorporate principles that guide you, even when the heat is on, stress is high, you can deal with pushback, that sort of thing, and maintain it over an extended period of time. You kind of shift that range up, instead of maybe going from 27 to 35, you can go from 28 to 36. If this solid self gets more solid. But that's sort of how I think about it. And then, what are the markers of a baseline of a range of functioning for you and for your family? What I hear is that your family has pulled up around you to some extent.
That has been very encouraging. I have seen a rise in my family's reaction in relation to me. So I'll give you a classic example of one of the places I've seen this in my own family. My mother and brother, for years, I would not pray with them because when they pray, their prayers were always chastising me through the medium of prayer. So the prayer would look something like this: Lord, Robert is arrogant and he's not as spiritual as he needs to be, and he's really making compromises with your word. Help him to, and this is literally how prayers would go. Help him to become more spiritual. And so I had a conversation with them individually, both of them, and I said, listen, one of the reasons why I don't feel comfortable praying is because I take prayer very serious, and I don't think that we should use prayer as a means of lecturing someone. I said, and the way that it appears to me is when we're praying together, you're using the prayer time to lecture me. That's the way that it comes across to me. And both of them, apart from each other, said, I can see how you come to that conclusion. That's very accurate. And I was surprised at how calm they were in their interaction with me. But I have noticed that they still, when they're in relation with one another one-to-one, still struggle. So my brother and my mother have not spoken for about 2 months now. because my mother shared some information about my brother with me that he had not given her permission to share. So he interacts with me, she interacts with me, but they are right now in a distance posture with each other. So that's why I'm at that place, like, it's working, but it's not rubbing off. It's only working in the relationship if I'm in there. But when you put the two of them together, so, and it's only working if I'm in the room, if I really think hard and plan it. And I actually met with my friends who are also studying Bowen, and they coached me on how to address that whole issue. So, it's a lot of work.
It is. Yeah, that very nice triangle there.
Oh, it's a heck of a triangle. If you'd ever like to join it, just let me know. I'll drag you on in it.
Well, I'll leave that with you. Well, I see Kathleen has her hand up. I don't want to monopolize here.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is just how hard it is to differentiate between the basic and the functional level of differentiation, right? If let's say you're in the postgraduate program and you know that you or some other group and you want to present on this work in the family or this work in this organization, right? Are you going to be on your best behavior because you want to give a good presentation and impress those people? And then that gets interpreted as a higher level of me moving up on the scale, right? There are just so many variables, to that functional level. I think it's just really hard. And so easy to convince yourself that it's like a shift up the scale versus like a boost from knowing that you want to look good, right? It's all those forces are always at work. I mean, yeah, the only comment I had was just, I really appreciated your thinking about the tendency to diagnose as an excuse to distance. I mean, how much of that is in the culture and even in the mental health world. I think it's just, even if you're trying to think systems, I think that's just so automatic and so easy for people to do, to just put that label on people and use it as an excuse. So I appreciated that comic because I do that also. And I mean, did you want to say I want to give you an opportunity, Dr. Davis, for last words before I announce logistical stuff. So any final thoughts, since we don't have any other hands raised?
Well, I think that you hit the nail on the head. And I hope that I've conveyed that, which is what you're hearing this evening, and what I've shared is my best work when I'm intentional and on top of my game. And we've seen fighters, boxers, when they're at the top of their game, they've trained, they're listening to their corner, and they're on top of their game, and they go out there and just look phenomenal. And then we see them the next fight where they didn't train as hard, they didn't listen to their coach, and they go out there and get knocked from one side of the ring to the other. And that is kind of the story of my life, which is show up when I'm really focused and thinking about it, and then not when I don't. And but to the extent that I have done something worthwhile, these were the steps, and these were the aspects of theory that were beneficial to me. Thank you.
All right, we got one last comment or question. Mary Overington, go for it.
So I started learning about Bowen probably over 40 years ago. And for a while when I lived in Maine for about 5 years, I met with a group of people and we focused on the theories of family system within a group that I was a part of. And each person, I mean, like we met once a month, and we focused on the theories as it applied to our own family. So my response, Robert, is that it was so much easier to learn the theories and then be able to apply them to my family. To work with the relationships that I wanted in my family and my expectations of my family. Are there any thoughts about such a group that might occur in Denver?
I've been riding off the coattails of the Bowen Center, and I haven't thought about any group here in the city of Denver. That would take too much initiation on my part, but I think all communities would benefit.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right. All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you. So thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for joining us this evening. I just want to highlight our symposium coming up the first weekend in November. We have Dr. Caitlin O'Connell from Harvard. She studies elephant societies. She's going to be presenting some of her research, which I think will be really interesting. And then our next professional lecture is going to be, I believe, on November the 30th. It's with Michelle Brofman, who is a novelist who's familiar with Bowen Theory and uses it in her writing. I know that she presented years ago when we just did these in person, and we've asked her to come back and sort of share it with the larger group in the virtual world. So I hope you all will consider joining us for that. To register for those, you can just go to thebowencenter.org. And look at the events, and hopefully we'll see you then. So thank you again, Dr. Davis, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Bye.